Energy Challenge. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about solar and solar options for residents in the state of Connecticut. With us today, we have Chris Lenda, who is the president and CEO of Aegis Solar. Thanks, Chris, for coming today.
Thank you.
So can you tell us a little bit before we begin about Aegis? I think you guys are the oldest solar installer in Connecticut, right?
Yes, we are. Aegis was formed in 1989, and we did our first solar system right in 1990. And our first solar electric systems that we installed were actually off-grid systems in remote locations. We've done a number for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and a number of other remote locations. Lots of islands, cabins, and actually complete homes and compounds that are off-grid.
That's great. And you guys are based, so you cover New England area, right? So Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, but you're based in
right
Connecticut?
Here in Connecticut, right here in Brantford, Connecticut, yes.
That's
where
fantastic.
We started, and that's where we still are, yes.
That's great. And can you tell us a little bit about your experience and what got you interested in solar?
Well, we really got into it by necessity. We had a customer who had a requirement, and they asked us, if we could know anything about solar and if we could put a solar system in a remote location to power their facility, and we said sure.
Oh, that's a good reason, I guess.
But without knowing anything about it, and we figured it out. And we've been doing it ever since.
Wow, that's great. That's great. Solar is really a hot topic right now here in Connecticut, and we often hear in the field about whether Connecticut has enough sunlight to make solar a viable option.
So, Connecticut has, very good solar irradiance levels. The solar irradiance levels here are actually much better than parts of the world where they have much greater amounts of solar. Germany basically has half of the world's solar installed in that one little country. Enough to be the equivalent of literally 20 nuclear power plants running at full capacity. And yet the solar irradiance levels here in Connecticut are actually much better than Germany.
That's incredible. So, it's hard to believe that we can compete with them, but the potential is here, is what you're saying.
We can actually exceed.
We can surpass them. There you go. So Governor Malloy will be happy to hear that one.
Definitely. People are always asking us in the field how they can tell if their house is a good candidate to have solar panels installed. Can you tell us a little bit about what makes a solar-friendly site?
Sure. A roof, they should have, a relatively large roof that's unobstructed with, just shouldn't have a lot of dormers or obstructions on it. That's relatively south-facing. The biggest impediment to solar here in New England are trees. And if you have large trees overhanging your house, you're probably not a good candidate unless you're willing to cut them down. A general rule of thumb, if the trees are 80 to 100 feet away from your home, then you're probably a good candidate.
Great. What if the house has an older roof on it?
If the roof is less than 10 years, then you really should consider replacing the roof, or at least the portion of the roof that's under the system. A typical solar electric system, we estimate the lifespan to be 30 to 40 years.
Mm-hmm. Crazy. And will installation of the panels damage the roof at all?
Installation will not damage the roof. There's a number of penetrations that need to be made, but they're watertight, and in 20 years of doing this and hundreds of thousands of holes in people's roofs, we've never had one leak.
Wow, that's incredible. If I'm really hesitant about installing the solar panels on my house, are there other options? Can I put them somewhere else?
Sure, they can be mounted on a pole as either a fixed array or a tracking array. They can also be mounted on a metal structure, basically anywhere on your property that's southerly facing.
Wow. Crazy. And in general, how much solar does a house need to function or to produce enough electricity to completely power the home?
That's a loaded question. So many homes, there's really no normal. A typical home, people say, well, what's a typical home. There really isn't. We've seen 3,000 square foot homes that consume 7,000 or 8,000 kilowatt hours a year, and other 3,000 square foot homes that'll consume 20,000 kilowatt hours a year.
Wow.
So the answer really is that we look at the annual kilowatt hour consumption of each home, and the system size is determined by that number.
Okay. So what would happen if it's raining out one day, or if the electricity goes out completely?
If the electricity goes out, the solar system stops producing power. There isn't any emergency power or emergency component to a typical solar electric system.
Okay. And what if your system produces too much electricity?
Your system is essentially directly connected to the utility grid. So any excess power goes directly back to the utility and essentially runs your meter backwards. You're essentially banking kilowatt hours, sending them back to the utility. They hang on to them when the sun goes down or you start drawing more electricity, then you're utilizing the kilowatt hours from your bank first.
Okay. And so you wouldn't necessarily see like a credit on your CLMP bill or anything?
You won't see an actual credit.
Okay.
Good to know.
Yeah.
Erin was asking before about the different types of placement for the solar panels, and you mentioned poled, mounted. Do people ever put them on the sides of their homes?
Very, very rarely.
Okay.
If there's no other option, just because there's quite a hit in efficiency by mounting them vertically on a wall. So if you don't have any other option, then we'll do that. But it's not the best option.
It's not the best option. Okay, so other than solar panels, what other equipment would I need in my home to...
The major components of a solar system are panels and inverters. And the panels simply convert the sun's rays into electricity, into direct current. And the inverter's job is to take that direct current and transform it into alternating current and sync with the utility grid.
There you go. And how long, this sounds like a very intense process. How long does it take to install one of these systems?
A residential system on a home, typical installation is, 2 to 5 days.
2 to 5 days.
2 to 5 days,
Wow.
depending on the size.
And does that depend, so, I know that there are different types of PV systems, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a PV system, and maybe you could talk a little bit more about it. There's a PV system that you would use if you want to use it for the electricity in your home, and then there's one that you would use for hot water. Can you talk about the difference?
Okay. Well, PV is photovoltaic, so that's electricity. The hot water is a completely different technology. A solar electric panel has wires connected to it. The solar hot water system has pipes connected to it. So the technology is completely different. The solar hot water system on a home they're very efficient. It's actually much more efficient than solar electric systems. It requires a lot less surface area on the roof, and the paybacks are actually typically, with rebates, take less time for the system to pay for itself than a solar electric system.
So I've heard, I don't know if this is a rumor or not, but I've heard a rumor that you want to consider how many people are in the home before you think about getting solar hot water. Is that true?
Sure, absolutely. The economics of solar hot water are drastically affected by the number of people using hot water. So the more people in the home, the greater your economic benefit. So typically, if you have 3, 4, 5 people, you're going to get have a much greater economic benefit, and the years to payback are going to be much lower than if you only have 2 people in the home.
That's really good to know. And we talked a little bit about, it only takes 2 to 4 days to install these huge systems. But how long does it take for me as a homeowner to actually see my electricity coming from solar power?
Well, it typically it can take up to 2 weeks after the system is completed. What we have to do is schedule a final inspection with the town. Town inspector has to come, inspect the system, sign off. Once it's approved, we send the approval to the utility company, and then we have to wait for an authorization to energize. Once we get the authorization to energize, we can turn the system on and you can start enjoying free power.
Wow, so there are multiple components here. So first, if for someone at home, if they were interested in this system, they would call for a consultation, right, from Aegis or whoever, free consultation, and then you'd go to the home, you'd install the system, and then...
Well, sure, the first step would be a free consultation. We would basically come to the site and just, evaluate. We would look at shading concerns. We would look at the roof. Is it the age of the roof? Is it structurally, adequate to support the solar panels? And then give the customer a comprehensive proposal on exactly, what the system would produce on an annual basis and what type of savings they could expect.
Very cool. And so then afterwards, after it's installed, you have to...
After they accepted the proposal, we would, then handle all of the paperwork, incentives, and applications, interconnect applications, and then install the system.
And then the town would have to approve it. And
then the town would approve it. Right.
Got it.
And then we would get a final approval from the utility.
So
it's quite, the paperwork actually takes longer in many cases, or seems to, than the actual installation.
And the installation. Well, that's very interesting. And you said in terms of the payback system, it really depends on the homeowner and how much they...
For hot water.
For hot water.
In terms of, so a typical hot water system, what we've been seeing in terms of years to payback, somewhere, anywhere between 3 to 7 years is pretty typical.
Wow.
And on a solar electric system, it's a little longer. Typically, 5 to 8 or even 9 years, is common. And the things that really affect that are not so much the cost of the system, although that's a factor. It's how optimal how much your system produces. So, if your system is perfectly oriented and has zero shading, then you're going to generate the most amount of electricity. So.
Definitely. Do you recommend any particular kinds of solar panels over another, or are there even different types of solar panels that people can choose from?
There are a very few different types of solar panels, a few basic technologies. Mm-hmm. And, within that category, there are just, it seems to be hundreds at this point of manufacturers. Mm-hmm. So it's really our job to really vet who the best manufacturers are and weigh that with the cost and the reliability concerns, and that's right. What we do.
So is there...
So we'll typically recommend just give the customer, a couple of different choices, in terms of, here's, we'll present an option and tell them why we feel that it's the best option. And then there are a couple of different manufacturers, and there are basically a couple of pricing, tiers in terms of you can use a premium panel, but it's at a premium price tag.
Right.
So you can reduce the cost of the system significantly. It often increases the size of the system because you're using a less efficient panel, which takes up more square footage. Mm-hmm. But it'll be at a lower cost. But there's always trade-offs.
I see. And is there any difference in maintenance between the different types of panels?
There's no differences in maintenance. We recommend to all of our customers, especially residential customers, that there is no maintenance required on the panels whatsoever. We get enough precipitation here that they don't need to be cleaned, mm-hmm. and certainly, cleaning involves getting on ladders that much more likely to either damage the panels or hurt themselves.
We don't want either of those things. What can I expect to see on my energy bills after I have the solar panels installed?
Well, we have lots of customers that actually have essentially no electric bill. Or basically all they'll see on their electric bill is the minimum charge, which is a meter charge, typically $16, something like that.
Wow.
And it really depends on the size of the system and how much energy they use. but in many cases we can virtually eliminate their electric bill.
Wow, that's crazy. So from a little bit we've heard, you say that, or from what it sounds like, anyway, if anybody at home that's watching the show is even considering putting solar on their home, the best idea is to start with having an installer come to your home and make an assessment really based on the home itself. And is that correct?
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
There's a number of installers, and they're all listed on the Cephia website. You can basically call any of them. They'll come to your home and do an assessment and provide you with an estimate.
Right. And again, you said that that assessment is generally free.
Yes.
Great.
Yeah, so I mean, that really leads us to a question that we get a lot in the field, which is how can a homeowner best select a quality contractor, someone who's reliable to do the work on their home? What credentials should they be looking for when they're interviewing different companies?
Well, I think in terms of, there's certainly been a proliferation of companies entering the market, and the barriers to entering the installation market are relatively low. So it's really on the homeowner to do their due diligence in terms of selecting an installer. And I certainly would ask, one of the first questions I would ask is, not just how long has your company been in business, but when was the first solar system you installed, and how many have you installed?
There you go.
That's very important.
Crucial questions. And for any of you that are at home, Neighbor to Neighbor, as we've mentioned before, is really here as a neutral party to help you select a quality contractor. And we do work with Aegis as well as a whole host of other solar installation companies. So I think you mentioned, questions to ask, but what sort of certifications should these companies be presenting or have?
Well, all of the companies have to either have in order to install a solar electric system, you either have to be a solar electrical contractor, have an electrical contracting license, or you have to have a solar photovoltaic contracting license. Certainly there are other certifications like NABCEP certification, basically kind of goes over and above all of those and just shows that you really specialize in sort of solar photovoltaic installations.
Can I ask what NABCEP stands for?
North American Board of Certified Energy Practitioners.
Wow, that is quite a title.
That's good. So are there any other things that we should be asking or that homeowners should be thinking about as they go forward to this process? So we've heard there's a list on the Cephia website. You can always use Neighbor to Neighbor as a resource. When you're interviewing homeowners, there are certain certifications that we're looking for, but we also want to ask how long the company has been around, since when have they been installing PV systems, and maybe how many they've been installing.
Yep, those are very good key questions to ask. Yes.
Good. So we also know that this can be very expensive. I know that Erin has a series of questions about rebates and incentives, but could you talk to us a little bit about what's available now for homeowners in Connecticut?
Sure. Cephia offers rebates, basically for upfront rebates for the installation of solar photovoltaics. On a typical, so let's say a 5 kW system, a homeowner might expect somewhere in the neighborhood of $11,000 or $12,000 in rebate money. And in addition to that, they will also get a 30% federal tax credit on the remaining balance.
Wow.
So they can't actually take the tax credit on the rebate amount. So they're only taking the tax credit on the actual out-of-pocket cost on their end. But between the two incentives, typically more, half or more of the system is paid for in incentives.
Wow. So, now is really a great time to act, right? Because we have incredible state and federal incentives.
And federal incentives. And the federal tax incentives are slated to expire in 2016. And certainly the incentives in Connecticut are declining. and designed to eventually disappear.
Right. We've heard that there are some leasing options out there. Can you talk a little bit about, what's out there, what the leases generally look like? And
Sure. Leasing, there are a number of options available to homeowners now, whether it's basically purchasing a system or leasing a system. And typically, leasing a system involves signing a long-term contract, typically 15 to 20 years. They are obligated to pay a monthly charge. Typically, they're saving money from day one. It's very easy to implement and doesn't require any capital expenditure up front. The downside to a lease is that at the end of the lease, you either have to purchase the system at what's called fair market value, so which nobody really knows at this point what that would be.
Right.
Or you can opt to continue leasing for a few more years. Basically, typically it's a 5-year extension.
I see. And so, in general, would you say that it's better to buy or lease your system?
I would encourage everybody, anyone looking into leasing, that it can be attractive. There's certainly a lot of fine print. So, and it's kind of like leasing a car. And in many ways, purchasing a system is better for the homeowner. But if you don't have any other options.
That's good to know. So, I want to go back for a second because we talked about all the great incentives that we have in the state. How can a homeowner qualify for these incentives? Because they're not available for everyone, right?
So the incentives are only available to customers in either CLMP or UI territory.
Okay.
So if you have either of those, electric companies is your electric supplier, then you basically can qualify for CEFIA rebates.
How do you qualify for these CEFIA rebates?
In order to qualify for a CEFIA rebate, you have to use a contractor that's listed on the CEFIA website, and they will basically handle all of the paperwork.
Great. And you also need to go through Home Energy Solutions in advance.
Yes. Exactly.
So, I would recommend, I know that we've talked about this before for any of you at home, efficiency first before you do solar. Solar is a fantastic option, but, reducing the consumption in your home is going to be the most cost-effective way, and then you can get a smaller system for your home. And that's the best way to gain access to these rebates that are available for solar.
Sure, absolutely. Conservation is definitely key. It goes hand in hand. There's, if you can reduce your load, you can save yourself lots of money. Solar isn't, inexpensive, so you can certainly put a smaller system on your home if you're saving a considerable amount of electricity.
Exactly. And for everyone who's watching today who lives in one of our neighbor-to-neighbor communities, as you know, the town benefits from every time that you have a Home Energy Solutions visit or do further upgrades like a solar system. And for the people who sign up for Home Energy Solutions and complete because of this TV show, we will give you guys an Eco Hatchery Kit, which is like a little energy efficiency starter kit. It has a kilowatt in it, which shows you how much power you're using. And again, we recommend that everyone does efficiency before they move forward to do solar. But I do think we are running out of time. Thank you, Chris, so much for coming out. It was such a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And if anybody at home has any questions, you can contact us at the neighbor-to-neighbor office. That number is 203
860.
I'm sorry.
372 4406.
Yeah, there you go. Or you can visit us at ctenergychallenge.com. All right, thanks, guys.
There you go.
Cool.